my hard-working students, let us come here once again to make a preparation of your this question important for your exam, for your coming exam, a critical appreciation of a river. Okay, and once again I am here to help you with all these important points, all these important headings related to this question. The poem A River that had been composed by A.K. Ramanujan as an Indo-Anglian poet. So now the title of this poem seems very easy, A River, but when we go through this poem we come to know the main purpose of A.K. Ramanujan. Actually, the students of English literature, if they have gone through so many different kinds of poem related to river, they always are aware of the beauty of nature. William Wordsworth, he has appreciated, and there are so many poets who has always presented only the bright side, the beautiful side of nature, and most of the poet, they always prefer to sing only the beauty of river. But here for the first time you will come to know that A.K. Ramanujan, how much realistic poet he had been, that it doesn't matter that what reality he is going to tell us. The important thing is that A.K. Ramanujan, he had been so sensitive poet that he focused his attention on the dark side of nature. Okay, we can say that on the negativity, on the damages given by nature. We always appreciate the phenomena of nature, that it is so beautiful, it is so brightful, but A.K. Ramanujan, we have driven our attention to the dark side of nature, and the important object of nature is here the river. Okay, that is our river in Madurai. So just let us go through all these important points one by one. It depends on you that what the first heading you choose. You can have an introduction, or you can start your answer with A.K. Ramanujan also, and you can also give an introduction to a river, but it will be better for you if this kind of question comes, critical analysis, critical appreciation, critical summary of a river, then first of all you must tell about that particular river mentioned by A.K. Ramanujan in this poem. Okay, so the river, the very first heading we can have here, the river, okay, the river that is mentioned by A.K. Ramanujan, because our whole attention, our whole focus is only on this particular river, swollen by a flood. Simply you can have this heading, and this is a very impressive heading, because if you take this heading, this means that you are going to tell within few words each and everything of this poem, that there is a river and that is always swollen by a flood, mentioned by different kinds of poet in different centuries or in different era. So now the river, this kind of river, it is swollen by a flood, but this river, it is always reduced to a narrow stream, means the river, it dries and it is also always full of water, right? And you have seen so many rivers, they can dry up and they can also full of water. That depends on the nature. So now both sides, the bright side of nature and the dark side of nature, is presented very well throughout this poem. So here A.K. Ramanujan, he has presented that kind of river that is dried, means it has reduced to a narrow, okay, a narrow stream because of its dryness, and then afterwards, then it is also always full of water because of rain, and it seems as if it is swollen by a flood. So you can answer, you can write in this heading that Madurai, okay, you have to mention here Madurai also, because A.K. Ramanujan, he is talking here a particular river that is in Madurai. Madurai is a city of temples, and Madurai is a city of poets, that is because the poets living in Madurai, living in that particular city, they always prefer to compose poems about cities, about temples of Madurai, right? And their poems always contain accounts of how every summer a river flowing through Madurai is reduced to a narrow stream, and that is always described by the different poets, especially by the poets who always love to write or describe river. So now here A.K. Ramanujan, when he starts to compose this poem, he gives a description of those kinds of poet who always like to write about Madurai city, about their temples, about their means especially about the river. Got? So in this way you can write here that when it is dried, then it is also flooded with the water, okay, water of the rain. And when it is reduced to a narrow stream, its water cannot pass through the water gates. In this way you can write, that depends on you. You answer this heading within 5-6 lines, that will be better for you, taking the help of quotation also, because A.K. Ramanujan, he has given us the ugliness of dried river also, that a river is beautiful when it is full of water, but when it comes to a narrow stream, it doesn't seem beautiful. And this is why that he has mentioned here the water gates, because that seems very ugly. That he says in that poem, the river, that the water cannot pass through the water gates, okay. We always find water gates to stop the water of a river. And why the water cannot pass through the water gates? Because of the piles of straw, garbage, just like that, piles of, even he has mentioned the hair of women. We always find a lot of cheapness, a lot of ugliness in the river when it comes to dryness. We find there a lot of garbage, a lot of piles or heaps of straw, heaps of women's hair, and it always, okay, the piles or the garbage, that always obstructs the flow of a particular river. So in that way you can mention very well, that depends on you, but I have explained the very first heading in detail. So now the second heading, bridges over the river, okay. There are always bridges over the river, and in Madurai also there is a river, and there are also bridges over that particular river. So the bridges over that river are always marked with many patches, okay. It seems as if there has been worked a patchwork, there is being made a patchwork, or the bridges are always full of many patches, okay. Many patches, that is you always find those kinds of patches on the road also, on the bridges, on the cloth also, on the dresses also. And patches indicate that bridges have been repaired, okay. So A.K. Ramanujan has given a very realistic picture of the bridges, and the bridges, those kinds of bridges who have, that has been, or who have patches of repair. Then he also gives us the description of the stones of the bridges. So you can answer in this way, in this heading, that the stones of the bridges, they always get wet, and when the stones get wet over the bridges, over on the bridges, then they look very beautiful, because they start to shine. And the dry stones, they always retain their original dull color. So taking the help of your text, you can give here few quotation also. Bridges over the river, that is the patchwork, okay, repair, because it is being repaired, or it has been repaired. Now the third heading may be the dummies. This is most important heading, because this is indicating the theme. The theme of this poem, the damage caused by the flood. We always look at the bright side of nature, but here A.K. Ramanujan, he has presented those kinds of the damages that has never been presented by any other poet. And the damage because of only flood. Okay, those damages, they have been caused only and only by the flood. That is another dark side of nature, we can say. So the damage caused by the flood, and in this heading you can also mention the beautiful picture, the different kinds of picture presented by A.K. Ramanujan, the destruction, the harm, the danger, the havoc wrought by the flood. So the poets, as A.K. Ramanujan, he tells that different kinds of poets, they always write poems about the floods in this river, because their focus is only to present the beauty of the river, and they always forget to present its ugliness or the damages that is always given to people, to animal, to their houses. So you can, if you prefer, you can also given here the description of a visitor, that a visitor once happened to spend one day in Madurai when a flood in the river was imminent. Okay, in this way you can answer within this heading. Now the visitor, he heard people everywhere talking about the level of the water rising very quickly, and we also know that when there is a flood, then the water, okay, the water, that is the level of the water, it always rises very quickly. It rises higher and higher, and the people, they always like to talk about the water, and they always are very terrified thinking of the damages that can be given by the high water level. So the water rising over the steps leading to the river, and the water rising on the bathing places also because of the flood. So the visitor, he heard people talking about the flood water sweeping away 3 villages, homes, pregnant woman, couple of cows, every year, that is annually, every year that happens, means the damages caused by the flood. It is just like it takes place every year, and people always talk of that. And that tragedy, that damage, that harm, that danger always comes annually, and this kind of tragedy is repeated every time the river becomes flooded. Okay, so all those kinds of damages can be mentioned in this heading. And now the damage, if you like to mention, you must mention, because A.K. Ramanujan, he had been so sensitive that even he mentioned that what kind of damage flood caused, that is a pregnant woman drowned. And there had been no poet who preferred to mention the damages given by the nature, given by the flood, or given by the river, because of the flood a pregnant woman drowned. So the new poets of the city, Madurai, they only quoted the lines composed by the old ones about the floods, but there is no poet. Okay, here A.K. Ramanujan, he seems very worried, he seems very angry also, that how much emotionless a poet may be, or how much ignorant a poet may be, that he doesn't seem to be related, to be affected with the damages given by the flood. And how can he be so sensitive, means so feeling less, that there is no sensitivity within his heart, that he is not looking at those pregnant women who have been drowned in the flood, in the river, okay, because of the flood. So no new poet wrote anything about the pregnant woman. Means all the poets, they are related only the beauty, the flood, the water, the river, but no new poet, okay, no new poet composed or wrote even a single line about a pregnant woman who had been drowned in the flood. And maybe so A.K. Ramanujan just look the imagination, the high sensitivity of A.K. Ramanujan, that he imagines that maybe, okay, who knows, maybe that particular pregnant woman, she may have, or she might had twins also, right? Means she carried perhaps two babies in her womb, feeling them kicking against the wall of her womb. So who knows this? A pregnant woman drowned. In this way you can write, but I just suggest to take the help of quotation also in this heading. Then the fifth heading, we cannot ignore this, Gopi and Brinda. Okay, Gopi and Brinda, the name seems to be very comic because they are the names of couple of cows, but it is very important, and I will advise you to mention the names, means to use this heading also, and to names the to mention the names of these cows, Gopi and Brinda. So when the visitor said that there was enough water in the flooded river and a pregnant woman, so oh Gopi and Brinda, just like this if you start to write. So the visitor, he said what he told when once he saw Madurai city, the river, what he told that flooded river, okay, flooded river always inspire the poet. It always inspires the poet to compose poem, and this is why that several poets come to Madurai. They like to visit that river so that they may compose their poems. And because this flood comes only once in a year, so in the very first half hour, the flood carried away three villages. Never forget, three villages, houses, a couple of cows. Okay, a couple of cows, and their names were Gopi and Brinda, and one, oh, a pregnant woman also. Maybe she may have expected to give birth to twins with no moles on their bodies, and that is a comic scene we can say here, and with nothing to enable anybody to differentiate between them after their birth. So I have told you that kind of twins. Then Gopi and Brinda, a couple of cows. So now the sixth one here, because actually in the very first heading, first, second, third, fourth and fifth, within these fifth headings you have mentioned very well the theme or the content of the whole poem are river, right? And these fifth headings will be sufficient for you. So now in the sixth one, you have come to the helplessness of the poet. What is the purpose of A.K. Ramanujan to tell so many things about the flooded river, or about the pregnant woman, about the couple of cows, about the bridges, the damages? Because A.K. Ramanujan, he felt himself very helpless, and here we find helplessness of the poet. Helplessness of the poet, why? Because a poet, what can be done by a poet looking such a damages given by the flood? So a poet cannot do anything, but he can only sing, he can only compose the poem. Means compose the poem, he can only sing of the floods, but he cannot help the people. Means he cannot prevent people's misery resulting from the floods in the river, and he can only compose poems. Okay, he can only write poems, he can only sing poems on the subject of floods, but he cannot help the afflicted people, the victim of those people that means those people who were destroyed by the flood. So this is the helplessness of A.K. Ramanujan, that nothing can be done by a poet, but at least he can compose the poem, he can sing, and he cannot help those, whether it was a pregnant woman or whether they were the animals. So if we come to the seventh point, we come to know that no doubt it is a very heart touching poem. Okay, why it is a heart touching poem? Because here A.K. Ramanujan, he has described the, first of all, he has described the damages caused by the flood. He has given a very pathetic description of a pregnant woman who may have had twins also, but she was drowned. Okay, she drowned because of this flood. And there is also a very pathetic description of a couple of cows named, there is a comic scene named Gopi and Brinda. But no doubt it is a very heart touching poem in spite of these comic names. So it is a heart touching poem. In this way you can write in the exam telling your own feelings, that why do you say it is a very heart touching poem? Because of these two events, right? And no doubt it is a realistic poem, because the theme of this poem is based on reality. It always happened whenever there comes flood, most of the people, most of the animals are always drowned, and their houses are also destroyed only by the flood. So the main theme of this poem is based on realistic, that is the reality of the life or the dark side of nature. So the ninth point is the annual flood inspires. Okay, the annual flood inspires means the annual flood, because the flood, it comes only once in a year, and this is the flood, this is the annual flood that always gives inspiration to the different poets. Okay, it always gives a lot of inspiration to the poets. That is why that they always like to come to Madurai, and they always prefer to compose poems related to this flood. So this is why that A.K. Ramanujan, he is saying that no doubt that this annual flood always inspire poets, but he is also very sad to feel that it only inspires. Okay, but it doesn't provoke any kind of sympathy, any kind of real feeling in their heart. Means even from the writers, even from the poets, we cannot expect that kind of emotion, that kind of feelings or sympathy for those victims or for those person who suffered. Okay, who suffered only because of that flood. So it inspires, but it doesn't produce any kind of mercy or sympathy in their heart for those afflicted people of Madurai. So nothing is done to protect human beings, animals, and even their houses also against the damage which is done by the flood water. So this heading is also very important, and no doubt that here we find an irony. Okay, ironical lines and ironical content is here. There is an irony even in the thought also. Irony that irony is that there is no feelings of pity, not even pathos within the heart of the poet. So that is a very ironical thought, because poets, they seem to be very emotional, very sensitive, but why does it happen that how can they ignore the damages given by the flood? So there is an irony, and as the poet, he has told us that means if you go through the text of this poem, you will come to know that irony is presented in this thought when he says that there is still water. Okay, I am not saying that the river is completely dried. There is still water, and water to inspire poets to write. So in that line there is a lot of irony, because the poet is still very angry, very sad, to feel that it is not trying to make any kind of feelings in the heart of the poets, but he's saying that don't worry, okay, don't worry if the river is dried. So don't worry, you can still get an inspiration, because there is enough water to be inspired, there is enough water to write your poem. So this kind of line, this kind of thought is very, very ironical, because the poet is saying that your focus is only the beauty of nature, only on your composition, and you are not thinking of the common people, of those afflicted people who have been destroyed by the flood. So this is an irony, a great irony given by A.K. Ramanujan, and that is why that within that thought we come to know that how much emotional our poet has become at the time of composing this poem, A River. Okay, so this is also a very good heading. If you like, you may have. Then next one is actually 10 or 12 headings will be sufficient for you, but for different kinds of students I have given you more and more. Now the next heading you may have, no doubt it is a tragi-comic poem. Okay, there is a tragedy. In tragedy you can give here the description of a pregnant woman, got pregnant woman who may have had twins, and comic when he mentions a couple of cows named Gopi and Brinda. So it is both. There is a comedy also, and there is also a tragedy. So it is this poem is a blend of, or this poem is a mixture of tragedy and comedy, right? So you can hear name of the cows, and you can also describe a pregnant woman. Now the another heading can be taken use of figure of speech. A.K. Ramanujan, he has used figure of speech, especially simile. Okay, just wait. He has used figure of speech, that is similes. Okay, similes have been used a lot by A.K. Ramanujan in this poem. So this heading is also very important, and here you can give the example of a few lines in which he has used this figure of speech, simile, and I have helped you giving the example of these two lines. The very first is if you go to the text, right, so you will find this line, the wet stone glisten like sleepy crocodiles. So that one line will be sufficient, like the wet stone glisten. Okay, the wet stone, their shining has been compared with whom? With what? With sleepy crocodiles. Got? So there is a simile, and another example can be given taking from your text. This quotation also, that here is also mentioned, here is also used the figure of speech simile. The dry stone, okay, the dry stone look like shaven water buffaloes, shaven water buffaloes. That is a very comic figure of speech, very comic line, that the dry stone look like shaven water buffaloes roaming about in the sun. So when you use this kind of heading or these kinds of heading figure of speech, and you must always give the example of those lines in which a particular poet used figure of speech. Got? So no doubt there is an absence of rhyme, because there is no rhythm, there is no rhyme scheme, and there when we go through the text of this poem, we find there is no melody, or there is no rhyme scheme, or there is no rhythm, right? So this is also very important, absence of rhyme. 14th one, irregular. If you like, you can have this heading also, irregular in form. Okay, there is no regular form of this poem, but this poem has been composed in irregular, right, in irregular form. So now his conventionalism, when we say his about his unconventionalism, that is that he has made a use of free words, open form. Okay, because irregular in form, open form, and repetition of words. There is a lot of repetition of words that makes his poem very effective. So this is his unconventionalism, and you can mention here all these one by one, all these points also: free verse, open form, and repetition of words, right? No doubt there is also beautiful imagery. Beautiful imagery, here you can mention a pregnant woman and a couple of cows, Gopi and Brinda, and imagery also that was bridges when there was a patchwork over them. So the beautiful imagery has been given by A.K. Ramanujan. His talent for phrase making also, that there are so many phrases. Simplicity of language, because we never have to take the help of dictionary, notes, or any teacher also to understand the content or theme of this poem, because A.K. Ramanujan, he has used a very simple language, even an average reader can also understand very well. So there is a flow there because of the simplicity of language, because all the words or the thought comes from the heart of A.K. Ramanujan. That is why that this poem A River, it becomes so simple to be understood, right? And next point, very important, last 2 points, I will suggest you not to ignore these last 2 points, because A.K. Ramanujan, he has presented here the dark side of nature. When you prefer, that depends on you. When you had this point, the third point, the damage caused by the flood, okay, and that was